How about dinner? What about dinner? Are these the same? Not quite. Let's sort this out. Hi, it's Mark from Britsent. They look almost identical. They're both used to make suggestions, and yet they don't always mean the same thing. Let's start with how about. We mainly use how about to make a suggestion. It's proactive. You're putting forward an idea. For example, how about going for a walk? How about we order a takeaway tonight? How about meeting at 6 instead? In all of these examples, you're suggesting a possible action. You're not reacting to anything specific. You're introducing a new idea into the conversation. Notice the structure. After how about, we often use verb plus ing. How about going? Or subject plus verb. How about we try again? Both are very common in British English, especially in informal conversation. How about we grab a coffee? Sounds completely natural. Now let's look at what about. What about is slightly more flexible. Yes, it can be used to make suggestions, but it's often used to refer to something that has already been mentioned. Something that might be a problem or something we've forgotten. For example, we could meet on Friday. What about Thursday? Here, what about Thursday is an alternative suggestion. You're reacting to the first idea. Another example, Jess and James have been so helpful on this project. What about Tom? Now you're pointing out someone who has been forgotten. It's not just a suggestion, it's a reminder. We also use what about to raise concerns. If we leave at 9, we'll arrive by 11. What about the traffic? You're not suggesting traffic, you're highlighting a possible issue. So here's a key tip. How about usually introduces a fresh suggestion. What about often reacts to something already said or highlights a missing detail or problem. Now here's the interesting part. There are situations where you can use both. Imagine this. I'm bored. How about watching a film? Or what about watching a film? In this case, both are possible. The difference is very subtle. How about watching a film sounds slightly more like you're proposing a plan. What about watching a film sounds a bit more like you're picking one option from several possibilities. Some other examples? We need somewhere to eat. How about that Italian restaurant? What about that Italian restaurant? Again, both are correct. In everyday British English, the difference is minimal here. Most native speakers wouldn't even consciously notice it. But let's compare two sentences which do differ. How about your brother? What about your brother? These can both be correct, but the meaning depends entirely on context. If we imagine this situation, we need one more person for the team. You could naturally say, how about your brother? Here you're making a suggestion. You're proposing him as an option. In this context, how about works perfectly because you're introducing a new idea. Now imagine a different situation. I've invited Mum, Dad, and Auntie Sarah. What about your brother? Here, what about your brother sounds like a reminder. You're pointing out someone who may have been forgotten. It's reactive. You're responding to what the other person has just said. There's also a special use of what about in questions that show concern or challenge. You should just quit your job. What about the mortgage? Here, what about means, have you considered this? It can even sound slightly critical, depending on your tone. Now a quick grammar tip. After both how about and what about, we usually use a noun or a verb in the ing form. How about going out? Not how about to go out. So back to how about dinner and what about dinner? Do you still think they're the same? How about dinner sounds like a suggestion. You're proposing a plan. Maybe it's 6 p.m. You're both tired and you say, how about dinner? In other words, shall we have dinner? But what about dinner is usually a response. Perhaps someone says, let's go out, and you reply, what about dinner? Now it sounds like a reminder or even a mild objection. Perhaps you spent all day cooking and feel your efforts haven't been appreciated. So the difference isn't grammar, it's intention, suggestion versus reminder or reaction. Here's a quick summary. Use how about mainly to make suggestions and introduce new ideas. Use what about to react, suggest alternatives, mention something forgotten, or to raise a concern. And in many casual suggestion situations, both are perfectly fine. The key is context. Ask yourself, am I introducing something new, or am I responding to something that's already been said? If this video was helpful, hit like and subscribe for more clear, practical English tips. Bye.